Today, Katie Haun reveals new details about her record-shattering Web3-focused VC firm in an exclusive interview. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Kate Rooney. Crypto prices are strongly higher today. The market as a whole gained 3% by 2 p.m. Eastern. That rally means the total market cap for cryptocurrencies has crossed back above $2 trillion. Bitcoin gained 3.8% since yesterday, pushing its price above $42,000. Ether prices, meanwhile, rose nearly 3%, crossing back above $3,000. And XRP gained 2.3%. Now today, we're jumping right into our main story. Katie Haun became one of the world's top crypto investors during her tenure at Andreessen Horowitz. Haun was the first woman to be a general partner at the firm. She deployed multiple crypto-focused funds worth billions of dollars. So of course, it made waves when she announced last December that she was leaving to start her own firm. It left a lot of us with a lot of questions, and today we now know that Haun Ventures has raised $1.5 billion for its new funds, shattering multiple records along the way. I sat down with Katie Haun for an exclusive interview to get details on this huge debut. Joining me now, Katie Haun, CEO and founder of Haun Ventures, a new venture capital firm. A lot to talk about. Thank you so much for being here in person.
Thank you for having me, Kate. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Of course. We have a ton to talk about, but let's start with your new fund, Haun Ventures. You're breaking a couple records here. So, $1.5 billion fund focused on Web3, largest debut venture fund, largest solo GP venture fund, and largest fund ever raised by a woman. And your name is on the door. How does that feel?
Well, it feels, honestly, Kate, like a lot of pressure. But, someone told me really recently that pressure is a privilege. And I think that's true. And so, we do feel under the microscope already being in crypto and Web3, and because of what you just stated, even more so. But I think that motivates everyone on the team.
I love that.
So it feels exciting.
Pressure is a privilege. That's a good,
yeah.
That's a good motto. So $1.5 billion fund, like I mentioned, there's a couple sides of this. You got the early stage portion of this, $500 million. For early stage investments, $1 billion for the acceleration side. Walk us through the setup. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, when I started out in crypto venture back in, rewind 4 years ago, most all projects in the space were still early stage. Crypto was still very early stage, and fast forward 4 years and we've seen tremendous growth in the ecosystem. And someone told me a statistic a few weeks ago, and I looked it up and verified it, and that is that now over 100 protocols out there are worth almost over $1 billion. And so 4 years into crypto investing, and there are plenty of growth projects in which to invest. And so I think it made a lot of sense to break out the funds into early stage and later stage. And $500 million for the early stage fund, we thought that was exactly the right size, and I'll tell you why. Because crypto now and Web3 touches all different sectors. There's gaming, there's social, there's consumer. If you think back to the early days of the web, Kate, if you could have had an internet fund in the early days of the web, you would have wanted a cloud play, a social media play, a developer tools play. You would have wanted to span all of those different kind of verticals within the internet. So too, we want to do that in crypto. And so that's why we have that $500 million early stage fund. And then cognizant of the incredible growth of some of these protocols and later stage equity companies, we have our $1 billion acceleration fund.
That's a great point about sort of the growth and the idea that 4 years ago there was nothing other than an early stage startup. I do want to talk about your early VC career. You started at Andreessen Horowitz, really built that firm into a powerhouse in crypto as well, and a multi-billion-dollar fund. I think a lot of people were surprised by the departure and want to know more about why you left. That really, for some people, is a dream job. Yeah. What was behind that decision?
Well, it was certainly a dream job for me, and I did it for 4 years, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity. But I think right now, Kate, zooming out, it is a time of incredible change and a time of incredible challenge in Web3. And I think both change and challenge in Web3, it's so important to really take notice of that. And I think if I think about my own career philosophy, I've always been of the mind that you should do a job where 50% of it cold and 50% of it you really don't know how to do yet. Someone told me once that there's no comfort in the growth zone and no growth in the comfort zone. And I really try to live that through my career. And I think it's really important that people like me step out of our comfort zones. And it's really important to the Web3 space that there are different voices in the ecosystem. And quite candidly, we think that Web3 is a new era of the internet, and it deserves a new era of investors.
Now, are there things that you can do with your solo fund that you couldn't do at Andreessen, that you were restricted in any way, and how will Haun Ventures be any different?
Yeah, I think, look, one of the things that we plan to do that's a little bit different from the Andreessen Horowitz model is we are building a much smaller, first of all, our fund is smaller, our team will be smaller, we will be very nimble though. And I think what we aim to do is deliver high impact moments to Web3 founders, what we call hero moments, that we're uniquely situated to do. And I think one of the things that we aim to do is really contribute to the projects that we back in. You know, gone are the days where founders just want capital, or even just capital and services. One of the things that Haun Ventures will do for our founders is really actively contribute to the projects in which we invest.
And there is still a little bit of overlap with Andreessen. I know some of the guys there are LPs in this current fund. Can you sort of describe the connections that will exist between Andreessen and Haun Ventures?
I think one of the really nice things, well, you mentioned right off the bat, we've publicly disclosed this, that they are one of our LPs. So already from the outset, obviously, there's a relationship there. And there are friendships there still. And as you know, 8 people from that firm came to join Haun Ventures. So we still intend to collaborate closely with Andreessen Horowitz, but also I think one of the unique things about our fund size makes it so that we don't have to lead every deal. We can play well with a lot of different other crypto investors. And I think one thing you see that founders want increasingly is they don't want just a single investor on their cap table, even in early rounds. And so one of the things that we're really looking forward to doing is collaborating with a variety of different funds out there.
So in a lot of ways, you have the privilege of starting from scratch. Is there anything that you're doing specific to Haun Ventures that is either completely new from the venture model or the startup model? How are you thinking about building really a new company?
Absolutely, and one of the really great things is, on the one hand, we're starting from scratch. On the other hand, I've been in this space for almost a decade, and I've taken a lot of learnings from that time. And the team I've brought also has been in the space for a number of years. So we know, for example, that our founders, crypto and Web3 founders, especially those that are founding protocols, really care about active participation. How will their investors contribute to the success of these protocols? And I have an anecdote to share. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I was talking to one of the founders who we have backed out of Haun Ventures. It's a very hot founder in Web3, technical founder. He would be considered by many in the venture capital world of a blank check entrepreneur. And he told me, you know, I'm not taking venture capital money at all. And I said, well, then why are you talking to us? And he said, well, I view what you're building as venture contributors. And that really stuck with me, Kate. And I think through that lens of what does it mean to be a venture contributor? I'll tell you that my team and I, we talk about system change, and we want to deliver system change. You know, in the early days of crypto, it started by building bridges just to regulators or policymakers, not just in this country, but around the globe. But now I think one of the things that we try to do very purposefully at my firm, and for the founders that we're backing in these projects, is we try to engage with multiple different kinds of communities. You know, whether you're talking about policymakers and regulators, whether you're talking about enterprise, whether you're talking about grassroots communities, whether you're talking even about Web 2 incumbents, or whether you're talking about media, we are trying to build bridges between different kinds of communities and the projects that we back. So that's just one way that we try to contribute to the projects that we're backing. And another thing that we do, and we started this when I was at Andreessen Horowitz, you know, we pioneered this token delegation program. And you know, we started out with just universities, but I've had a lot of ideas over the last couple years about how we could even expand those kinds of token delegation programs to really involve different communities and different voices in this ecosystem. And so look for Haun Ventures to have a token delegation program that is supercharged.
Really interesting. Well, you mentioned the team that you've hired with a lot of experience. Where are you looking to hire from? Is it from crypto, from Washington, where you spent a lot of time, from finance? Yeah. Talk about your team that you're building.
Yeah, it is very much from crypto. I think that one of the things that we are screening for, and we have a lot of great candidates who are applying already, even though we're just now launching, is we are screening for people who have shown a deep commitment to crypto. And that can be in a variety of different ways. So, we know that it's not one size fits all. I'll talk a little bit about the team we have. We started a bit with an unfair advantage because we got to take 8 of the top people from Andreessen Horowitz Crypto, which is obviously a fantastic franchise. And these are people that I've worked with for years, even before working with them at Andreessen Horowitz. So we start with that team, and then we've started to build our deal team. And let me tell you a little bit about my first deal team hire. That's Sam Rosenblum. And Sam was Coinbase employee number 30. In fact, Kate, long before Coinbase Ventures, which has now been very successful as a venture fund, Sam is responsible for writing the first check that Coinbase Ventures ever wrote, and also to hiring that team that became Coinbase Ventures. So Sam is perfectly positioned to be our first deal team member. And then I'm going to be hiring, and we're going to be hiring, a counterpart to Sam on the technical side of things. So stay tuned for more news there. And then each of them are helping me build out a deal team, kind of pods, if you will. But in addition, one thing that I think Haun Ventures does that's pretty distinctive, at least in the crypto space, is we pair that deal team, that exceptional deal team, very crypto native, with really seasoned operators that live and breathe the crypto ecosystem. So I'm talking about people like Tamika Tilleman, who's our Chief Policy Officer, our Global Policy Officer. And a lot of the work that you see coming about now, with some of the positive changes, I think, that we've seen in the regulatory environment, a lot of that has been a lot of work Tamika's been doing behind the scenes. Of course, I can't give Tamika all credit because a lot of participants throughout the ecosystem have been working really hard at that, but Tamika is front and center there. So Tamika is one of those seasoned operators. And by the way, these are seasoned operators that crypto and Web3 founders ask for by name. Another one of them is Rachel Horowitz, who was really the first communications leader of the Web3 era. I mean, she was Coinbase's first VP of communications and built a brand at Coinbase that is a trusted brand of one of the most trusted crypto, in fact, I'm biased, but I'll go ahead and say the most trusted crypto exchange in the world. And of course, Rachel was instrumental in building that brand. And then we have Chris Lehane. Chris Lehane was for years and years, who is our Chief Strategy Officer, years and years was one of the key people on the executive team at Airbnb. And Chris was really instrumental in helping to make Airbnb a noun and a verb in 200 jurisdictions around the world. And now, Kate, Chris Lehane has dedicated the rest of his career to running the campaign for crypto. So these are just some of the ways that my team is going to contribute actively to the crypto and Web3 ecosystem, and I couldn't be more excited about it.
So you've got a really interesting resume and background. You spent about a decade in DC investigating white-collar crime, gangs, I mean, everything, you name it. Worked on the Mt. Gox case, and then at one point I remember early on talking about one of your bosses asking you to actually shut down Bitcoin or investigate it.
Yeah.
Really interesting background to now be one of the biggest investors in the space. There's been a lot of talk in DC recently about crypto's potential to get around sanctions. Is that viable? Is that really happening?
I think not. I mean, we saw even last week, there was a hearing, Senator Warren featured prominently in that hearing, and I think even some from the Treasury Department and FinCEN said that the odds of that happening are, to quote them, slim. So I'm not the only one who thinks that. And why do I not think that? Kate, you're right that I spent a decade, dedicated my career really to prosecuting some of the largest online money laundering schemes out there, including illicit flows of illicit finance, plenty of Russian cyber criminals and Russians trying to move money around. And I can tell you that I would take the digital breadcrumbs of crypto any day of the week over the legacy payment systems. Now, why is that? That's because we take a false sense of security through the Bank Secrecy Act and what it requires. Those laws are 50 years old, and they were developed at a time when the banking system was neither as global as it is today, nor digital. And so what do? You get paper records that literally take, in some cases, where it's global, years to get, if at all. I'll tell you that 5 times out of 10 when I subpoenaed a financial institution, I got no reply at all. And the times that I did took so long that by the time I was able to follow those funds, they had moved on several hops beyond that. Now contrast that with crypto, which is transparent, immutable, and more real time. It's built for the modern world, and so I always call it digital breadcrumbs. And I know firsthand that I solved plenty of cases by following crypto breadcrumbs around the globe much faster. And look, we're just proving this out over and over again. I mean, you've seen in the last year alone, the United States government has done multiple billion-dollar seizures, including from the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack in 1 month. That's unprecedented to have a seizure internationally of that size from stemming from a computer crime with fiat or legacy payment systems. So I actually think crypto and Web3 are a step-level function improvement over legacy systems. And I think that it's also, by the way, a step-level function improvement over some of our financial systems and also Web 2 platforms, which is why I think it's really interesting that someone like Elizabeth Warren has somewhat of rose-colored glasses viewing the space.
Speaking of Elizabeth Warren, she's been among the more vocal senators when it comes to crypto and the idea of it being used to get around sanctions. Is crypto bipartisan right now? Are you seeing an even split with both parties?
You know, actually, if you would have asked me this a few years ago, I would have said no. But the last year has been very encouraging for me to say, yes, it is actually bipartisan. Why do I think that? Look at, you have very progressive freshman Congressman Richie Torres, who just last week wrote a really powerful op-ed on the benefits of crypto. So there's that. But then more importantly, even than that, I think this executive order that came out from the Biden administration a couple of weeks ago is very encouraging. Why is it encouraging? It's encouraging because it directs every single federal agency to come up with their Web3 strategy and plan and to really partner with industry to come up with a path forward.
And did that meet your expectations, the executive order? I know there was a lot of excitement and hype around it. Was it as substantial as you maybe thought going into it?
You know, one of the things that I thought was really important that came out was that all agencies in the federal government are going to be, or directed now, to look at crypto and Web3. And I think that's just a reflection of how big the space is and how much of the economy it will become over time. One senator told me a few weeks ago, Kate, you know, it was untenable how it was previously because we had just a handful of agencies, kind of financial regulators, that were really occupying the field here. And he told me, that senator, that would be as if you had put 1 or 2 agencies in charge of the entire economy of the future, which of course is not a good idea. So why I think the executive order was such a big deal is that it directs every single federal agency to study this technology. And that's just reflective that it will really disrupt all kinds of different sectors in this country and in the world.
Absolutely, very much a global asset class. What are your expectations for timing and for anything to actually come out of that? People here study and think, okay, this may actually take a little bit longer than we thought. Anything tangible that you want to see out of Congress or any federal agencies when it comes to crypto and maybe providing more clarity?
Absolutely. If I could speak directly to all of the legislators in this country, the thing that I think is really needed and that is actionable is bipartisan legislation allowing a regulatory sandbox for crypto.
I want to move on now to NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Do you own any?
I do. And I've owned them for a few, I still do own some. I don't own as many NFTs as some in the crypto space, but I do have a selection of NFTs, and I started collecting them a couple of years ago.
What was your first NFT purchase?
My first NFT purchase was from an artist in Spain, and I found it on one of the internet platforms out there, and I bought it just because it spoke to me. I liked it as a piece of art. This was in the early days of kind of NFTs.
Are you collecting more on the art side, or is there any utility that you're seeing behind any of the NFTs you own?
Well, actually, it's a great question, Kate, because we did acquire also an ENS domain name. So that was an NFT. Actually, come to think of it, I also donated to charity. The CFO of OpenSea was raising for a cancer charity. And I have one NFT that represents almost a charitable donation. So it's not just digital art. And this is what I've been saying for years. It is digital art. I own a piece of digital art by that Spanish artist. I also own a couple pieces by a female artist whose name is Aegean. And one of the really great things is she's programmed these NFTs, as many artists have, such that she gets to share a cut of all future earnings or transactions. And I think that's something that's really special about NFTs. If you think about it, if Aegean had a piece of physical art right, that she had sold through a gallery, she would have participated one time, and that's it. No matter if her work of art became very famous or traded hands many times over. And this way, if I am ever to sell any works by Aegean, she will always, for all time, kind of in perpetuity, get a piece of that transaction. And I think that's something that's really special and that makes NFTs really a new business model for the internet. And of course, it starts out with just digital art, but we're already seeing different use cases. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot more.
It's really interesting. Like you mentioned some of the profit sharing and the ideas there, and OpenSea. I know Haun Ventures is an investor in OpenSea as well. There has been a bit of a slowdown when it comes to NFT activity, and some measure that on just Ethereum activity in general. Have you seen that when it comes to sort of the developer activity or minting NFTs?
Yeah, well, in terms of developer activity, we've actually seen the opposite. We've seen so much developer activity. In fact, a lot of times people are really focused, and I've seen this during my decade in the space, Kate, people are so focused on the prices that they forget sometimes about what we as investors in crypto think of as far more important signals, like developer activity. A recent report said developer activity is at an all-time high. And this is actually a year old, so it's a recent report, but with data that's a bit lagging. 18,000 new software developers in this space. I think that's really exciting. And we're still seeing pretty high volumes. OpenSea had one of its highest months ever in volume, including recently. And you're right that Haun Ventures is an investor, and of course Andreessen Horowitz crypto fund is an investor, and many others, many other leading crypto funds. So we're very proud to partner with OpenSea, and we're really excited also not just about OpenSea but about all kinds of other tools in the space devoted to NFTs, because of course we think NFTs are just going to be an incredibly large category, and we're already seeing this now with music. We think we'll see it with media. The whole concept, Kate, of digital scarcity is something that is so powerful, and again, really just a whole new business model for the internet. And I think we're just really at the early innings of it.
Are there any examples of NFTs that you've seen and thought, that probably doesn't need to be an NFT? That it's
Sure, but I've thought that about a lot of art too. I thought that about a lot of physical goods. So absolutely, in the digital world and in the physical world, absolutely.
And we talked a little bit about Ethereum. As far as layer 1 protocols and what you're excited about, is there one that you look towards as, okay, this really is the future, whether it's Ethereum or Solana? What are you the most excited about?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm not going to pick one, first of all. I just won't pick one. But I do think that there are room for multiple layer ones. In fact, as much as I'm a fan of the ones you already mentioned, of course, there are even new layer ones coming to market. We just announced an investment in Aptos, which is a new layer one that prioritizes speed and scalability. So we're very excited about that too. I think you'll start to see more specialty layer ones emerging. So even though it's bold in 2022 to launch a new layer one, we still think there is a lot of room there. And of course, at the same time, we're very big believers in some of the layer ones you've mentioned and more that you haven't mentioned.
That's really interesting.
In fact,
to watch.
This is the first interview where someone's talked about a layer one and hasn't mentioned the granddaddy of them all, Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the OG of cryptocurrency. There's some that really, Bitcoin maximalists that really see it as the end all be all. Yeah. What is the value of Bitcoin right now? Is there any sort of use case beyond a store value?
Well, I think you need to really step back and think about what makes Bitcoin special. And what makes it special, and again, it was the granddaddy that launched now 1,000 experiments, 1,000 and counting. And it does have the greatest brand recognition out there of anything in crypto, and I think that is really special. And it's also been around the longest. So I think for that alone, but obviously we remain very excited about the potential of Bitcoin, but I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. I call myself a crypto maximalist, Kate.
Love that. That's, while we're talking about Bitcoin, what about prices? I mean, that's something we talk about constantly, and it's down significantly from the high back in November. Are we in a crypto winter right now?
It's so hard to say whether we're in a crypto winter, but I will say that I think people in the space really get focused on prices. And when people were really focused on the Bitcoin price, we were focused on what's happening architecturally, what's happening with scalability. And when I think back to deploying the first 2 crypto funds I was involved with, I mean, that was during a period of immense volatility. If you talk about the first crypto fund I was involved in helping to deploy, it was really definitely a crypto winter. Prices were down 70%, Kate. And you know what I learned from that? I learned that don't get too distracted by the prices, because during that deployment of that first crypto fund, you know, Uniswap, Solana, OpenSea, and many, many other projects were born during that cycle. And so one of the things I've learned as an investor with really a long-term view of the space is that great products are going to be built and great protocols are going to be built no matter what the prices are in the space. So it's very important to us to be long-term investors. You know, we're not a hedge fund, we're a venture fund. And so we take kind of what I used to say was a 7 to 10 year view. But if I'm honest, I think now really it's more a 5 to 7 year view. And it's still long-term.
And things move quickly in crypto.
Which is why I've adjusted from 7 to 10 years, from 5 to 7. But I think still 5 to 7 years, if you think about just what's happened in the last 4 years in crypto, it's been very dramatic. So I think 5 to 7 years is still a very long-term outlook in crypto.
And as far as the setup with Haun Ventures, are you guys doing any token deals instead of equity, or are you doing both? How do you decide what's appropriate based on the startup?
We absolutely do both. And I think that's something that I've learned through being involved in deploying 3 other crypto funds, is that there's still a ton of potential in just crypto and Web3 equity business models, but also token business models. And indeed, some of the most exciting founders today in Web3 are very much building token projects. And that's something that I think is really important. I don't think that you can really be a crypto investor without holding tokens. And of course, as we talked about, it's important not just to hold the tokens, because founders today want you to be participating with those tokens. They want you to be staking your tokens. They want you to be delegating your stake. And who knows what new behaviors will emerge. I think it's really important that investors like me and like others in the ecosystem think about all of the different ways that we can be involved in participating in these ecosystems, including in governance.
Have you run into any founders, crypto entrepreneurs that don't want to take funding from a venture capital investor and do equity deals and would say, you know, you're free to buy tokens, but we really don't want to take VC money?
Actually, I haven't run into that yet. What I have run into, and this is increasing, is that they don't want their protocols or their projects to be majority owned by venture investors necessarily. They're very focused on community and bootstrapping their networks. So I haven't yet run into anyone who will not take venture capital money. I did share an anecdote earlier, though, about someone who said he won't take venture capital money, and what he meant by that is just pure investor, an investor who would just sit on the sidelines. But again, we're building a new kind of firm, and I think many others are building new kinds of firms where we are really looking to the investor community to be more active and to contribute. And different kinds of investors are going to contribute in different ways.
And is that a potential threat to your business model or the venture business model, that some of these entrepreneurs could self-fund, that they might not eventually need VC money?
Well, I think that's why it's really important to stay on our toes and look for ways to contribute to these ecosystems so that the founders want us involved.
I mean, we talked a bit about Web3, which has gotten a lot of buzz on Twitter. There's been some fierce debates between your former colleague, Chris Dixon, Square founder and Twitter founder, Jack Dorsey. It's gotten a little bit tense on Twitter when it comes to Web3. What's your take on some of the arguments there about centralization and venture capital involvement?
Well, you know, look, I think one thing is stepping it back. It's kind of, I look at it as Web3 is finally getting some of the critics it deserves in the space, and there is a healthy debate going on. And I think healthy debate and nuanced debate is incredibly important. I think if I could have the choice between Jack Dorsey or Moxie offering some critiques versus some of the myths that we've heard perpetrated for so long in the space, I would certainly choose the former. So I think that debate is healthy. I think then when you talk about centralization or decentralization, I try, and I've tried throughout my career, never to see things as completely black or white. The truth is always somewhere in between, often anyway, maybe not always, but often in between. And I think that centralization and decentralization exist on a spectrum. And the fact of the matter is today, there are still plenty of centralized services. And we're just seeing this dawn of this new era of decentralization, and I think that's very exciting. But I've always said it's really important not to judge the current state of innovation by the end state of innovation. And so it exists on a spectrum, is where I come out.
And Web3 in general, I mean, it seems like there's just so much buzz around that as a term and as the upside and optimistic potential of what it could do. How do you sort of cut through the noise as an investor and really find value there?
Well, one of the reasons that I think Web3 has really taken off is because for so long when we talked about crypto, it was cryptocurrency. And I think one of the things that's become very clear, and we've been saying for years, is that crypto is about much more than just currency. So I think one of the reasons why you've seen the nomenclature change is really just a reflection of the fact that entire industries and entire verticals are really getting touched by crypto now and by decentralization.
What are some of the more interesting applications? We talked a little bit about blockchain gaming, not just currencies or cryptocurrencies.
Sure. Yeah.
What might surprise people that's being built on Web3?
I think one of the things that will really surprise people is some of the identity and reputation systems that we're just at the very beginning of seeing. And if you think about things like layer 2, which we'll be investing in, but I think if you think about things like layer 2 and you think about ZK technologies, which is shorthand for zero knowledge technologies, I think one of the things that might surprise people is that those ZK technologies, we think, could hold some of the keys to solving some of the problems associated with Web 2, whether it's PII, whether it's security, whether it's identity. So I think some of the really interesting projects out there that we're just starting to see are reputation and identity on the web. And I think that's very exciting.
Speaking of sort of the Web 2 companies, we've had big tech look to get into whether it's the metaverse or Web 3 in general. Facebook changing its name to Meta. What's your take on what big tech's role should be in whether it's the metaverse or Web 3 or this new technology that in some ways might be meant to disrupt them?
Right. Well, I think, look, the upshot, Kate, is that what we are seeing is it's not a week that goes by where a new large entrant isn't coming into the space. And I think it's just reflective of the opportunity and that it will touch all industries. It's no different than you see some of the big banks and big financial institutions when they started investing in and getting more inquisitive about fintech. They saw that disruption was coming, and I think it's really no different here with some of the Web 2 incumbents. Similarly, it's not just Web 2 incumbents. We see governments now talking about creating central bank digital currencies or partnering with stable coins. So I think it's not just Web 2, it's just those are the ones we're hearing about now.
And when it comes to the metaverse, I know there's different versions of that.
Right.
We've got the Facebook meta version,
Right.
and then a lot of other people in the industry building something completely different. Mm-hmm. What's your take on where that's going?
What my take on where the metaverse is going is that it is going in a direction, and I firmly believe this, that will be more open and permissionless, where people will be able to own goods digitally and virtually that they can transport across platforms. So my take on where the metaverse is going is that it will be open and one can move seamlessly through different rather than the walled garden model that we have today.
I want to ask you about valuations. We've seen the price of Coinbase shares at least come down about 60% from the all-time high. Fintech in general, some of the higher growth names are really getting hit right now. Are you seeing that move over to private companies right now? And what are you seeing in terms of private valuations?
So not yet, actually. I think there's a bit of a lag. And candidly, we're still seeing very high valuations in crypto projects. And I remember last time this happened, these kind of macro market corrections happened, it took a while for that to translate over into crypto. So I think the same could be true here. So we're not seeing it. We're still seeing very high valuations in the crypto space. I will say, though, that some of those high valuations, some of those companies are actually profitable and have metrics that you can go look at. And so I think it's important that we don't treat crypto and Web3 as a monolith, because they really are very different in terms of what problem they're tackling and different projects out there. Some haven't launched yet, some have launched yet, so it's important not to judge them all the same.
Or is there a possibility that cryptocurrency companies could be immune from a broader downturn if we do see it hit private valuations?
Well, again here, Kate, I think it's important not to talk about crypto as a monolith. So I think it really depends on what use case you're talking about. Are you talking about remittance use case? Are you talking about disrupting media? Are you talking about, NFTs and the ownership and creator economy? I think it's all very different. And I think each of those things have different metrics that we as investors look to. So I wouldn't say that it would be immune. You can't have, these things not affect each other at all, is my belief. But to what degree is, I think, the question that a lot of us are watching. And again, there, it really depends on what aspect and what use case of crypto you're talking about.
And one interesting sort of economic experiment we've seen on the global stage is what El Salvador is doing with Bitcoin, adopting it as legal tender. Do you expect other countries to follow suit, and is that a good idea?
I think other countries will follow suit. The question really, to my mind, is will they adopt Bitcoin as legal tender or something else? And I don't know. But one thing I do know is that an increasing number of countries are looking at different kind of stable coins and creating central bank digital currencies. I feel like we get pinged weekly, my team and I get pinged weekly by different jurisdictions wanting to explore this. So that's something that's really interesting.
What about a stable coin in the US, a central bank digital currency? Are you seeing progress on that side? And does that threaten some of the private stable coins that have taken off, like the one that Circle and Coinbase have worked on?
Well, you know, when you ask if I'm seeing progress on that side, I'm seeing progress by people talking about it, but in terms of actual building, no. In fact, the Fed has already said that they're still studying it. And I think the fact of the matter, Kate, is that although there is increasing appetite for a central bank digital currency in this country, especially as we look to see Russia's doing this, China's doing this, you know, other countries are doing private central bank digital currencies and other jurisdictions are, the US has realized that it needs to catch up. However, I think that this is a really hard problem to solve, and my personal belief is that the US government's greatest chance here on keeping that reserve status of the dollar, the global reserve status of the dollar over time, I don't think this is going to happen you know, in the next couple years, is to really partner with private industry who are doing this. You've mentioned some private stablecoin projects, but I think that we've seen great things happen in this country when private industry partners with the government. I mean, last year we saw the vaccine happen. We've seen great things happen with the space program. And I think crypto is really no different, and something as big as currency is no different. So my own personal view is that the best shot for the US government is really to partner with the private sector on a stablecoin.
So as far as who's investing in your fund, are you able to talk about your LPs and what types of maybe institutional investors are looking to get exposure to cryptocurrency companies through Haun Ventures?
Well, I can't name LPs by name. What I can tell you, though, is we have a really diverse, strategic, and global set of LPs. You know, we have a lot of the traditional LPs that you see, you know, that Andreessen Horowitz or Sequoia or other leading venture capital firms have. But what we did is, you know, quite candidly, we did have our choice of LPs, and we really picked LPs that shared our strategic vision for Web3. And especially even asking them, you know, especially those who wanted co-investment opportunities. We kind of posed the question of why would a crypto founder want a co-investment from that institution? And the answers were really interesting, and it led to a lot of really great discussions and frankly, a lot of brainstorming around how some of our LPs really wanted to be strategic partners, including to our founders that we back. So I'm really excited that our LP base really does share our vision for what Web3 will look like.
And they want to work closely with some of those crypto startups?
For some of them, yes. And I think that some of them will emerge as real pioneers in this space. And our LPs, as I said, are very diverse. They're not all financial institutions, and they are very global, and they are very strategic, and they've been really handpicked.
Great. Well, Katie, we'll leave it there. Katie Haun,
Thank you,
CEO and founder of Haun Ventures. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.